Welcome to WorkSelfLife, the podcast that navigates the intersection of productivity, presence, and purpose in a distracted world. I'm Emily Rentas.
And I'm Marcus Schaller. And in each episode, we'll explore the crossover between Eastern philosophy and Western psychology, helping you reconnect with your true self, redefine the way you approach work, and live a more balanced, intentional, and harmonious life. So today we were going to talk about what it means to embrace stillness and redefining our relationship with busyness, right? So one way I look at this issue with busyness is kind of starting out with what is the current situation? Why is busyness a problem, right? And ultimately, the way I look at it, and I'd love to hear your perspective on this as well, of course, but it's almost like there's this epidemic of overwhelm, this epidemic of chronic busyness, right? And people will talk about how they don't have time to eat lunch, or they don't have time to go to the bathroom, or whatever it is that there's just normal human beings should be able to do. And at the same time, there's all this talk in the corporate world about work-life balance and how important it is to help people take care of their mental health and all that. So there's all these different messages. And, one of the things we were going to talk about today that we had chatted about was really kind of like figuring out, okay, first of all, like, why is this happening and what can people do about it? And I would like to just kind of hand it back over to you to start out with, like, how do you see this in the world? Like, how do you see busyness manifesting in the world around you?
That's a great question. What I've often found that folks, when it comes to busyness, it comes in different forms. It comes with commitments, it comes with distractions, it comes with filling the time with things just to not sit with themselves or be bored, or to really just be constantly in this place of motion and action. So when people feel that they're constantly in this place of motion and action, they feel like they're going somewhere. They feel like they're accomplishing something. They feel that they're being productive. What I've found, and it's gotten, I would probably say, worse in the last couple of years because of the pandemic, is this constant fear of I'm not being productive enough. But at the same time, people are saying they're very busy, right? So there's a sense of you're filling your time with a lot of things that are not leaving you feeling fulfilled and efficient in how you're utilizing your time. So people feeling that they have to constantly be in that state of motion, and that state of motion can be very hypnotizing for people because it starts keeping your sense of adrenaline and hormones and things going at a certain pace, that when that is not happening, you start seeking things that will bring that feeling back. So busyness is showing up in a lot of different ways that really just impact people's sense of self-esteem, well-being, but still leaving people empty sometimes at the end of it. What do you think about some of that, Marcus?
Yeah, one of the things that when you said not being productive enough, that really jumped out at me because specifically, I mean, the not being bored is a huge part of it. And that's a whole nother series of podcast episodes, but the not being productive enough. And I remember reading a few years ago, this book about creativity, specifically around, our kind of information-based economy and knowledge work, right? So back in the day, if we worked in a more industrialized society, there's a pretty obvious output. Your productivity is based on how many units of widgets you created in the factory that day. It's kind of easier to measure. And a lot of our work structure, our office hours, our work hours, the work week even, it's all based on that industrial model, right? It's all based on factory work. And we've taken that with us. But what's changed, though, is that productivity today is much different than it might have been 50 years ago in that sense, because you're like, as an example, if you come up with a really good solution to a problem, you don't necessarily look like you're working when you're doing that, right? You might come up with your best idea when you're taking a walk, or you might come up with a brilliant solution while you're staring out the window or while you're on a Zoom call or whatever, right? So it's hard for people to be able to demonstrate their productivity as easily. And I think that what happens is, in order to be able to show their bosses and their coworkers how productive and how valuable they are, it's almost like they have to demonstrate it in ways that aren't necessarily healthy, like constantly being on Slack and constantly responding to every email and being on Zoom call after Zoom call after Zoom call, because they look like I'm being so productive. But then it comes down to like the definition of what productivity really is. And that's, we could talk about that. But what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, well, it's easy to show a calendar full of commitments and saying, look how all the stuff that I'm part of, right? Look at all the Slack messages that I received today. Look at all the emails that I got. It's very tangible things that people are seeking to validate that they're productive, that they are doing something, and not really valuing long-term deep work and being in a state of presence that it takes some time. There's some evolution to it. You're not going to see the immediate effects of it, right? Because we're in a society that struggles with delayed gratification. Show me now at this moment how valuable you are and what you're doing. I don't want to know how valuable you are going to be later. How valuable are you going to be now, right? So then people are constantly reaching for something that's going to show, well, I get invited to all these events. I do all this stuff. This is my value. This is what I do. So I must be contributing something. So when things are tangible, it's easier for people to grasp at it instead of somebody who is, working on a novel for 5 years. Right. And that is long-term work that really require, and there's a lot of editing, there's a lot of deep work, there's really really understanding that, but that cannot take place unless you give it the space for it to gestate. And a lot of folks struggle with gestation of their ideas and their work because they have to immediately show something for it.
Absolutely. Yeah. And ultimately, the reason any of this stuff matters is because there is a real impact to that, right? It's not just in a vacuum. It's not based on just a philosophical kind of point of view of what it means to be a human being. There's a real negative impact in this. And you're, I have kind of a layman's kind of overview of what that impact is, more anecdotally of what I see in clients and what I see on LinkedIn or whatever. But, I'm sure you have a much deeper kind of insight into like how this is affecting people in the real world, as far as their mental health, as far as their sense of self. What are you seeing out there as the impact that this mindset's having on people?
It's causing a lot of difficulties with sense of self-esteem, anxiety, depression, constant worry about the future, constantly seeking external validation and confirmation that they are in fact doing something and doing something well. So people are often finding themselves questioning what they're doing. And when they're not seeking that validation, it brings them to a place of sometimes despair that they are not doing what they have to do. They need to now do something differently or more intensely to then get the response that they want. So then they start having difficulties in their day-to-day life, problems sleeping, problems eating, not being able to sit down, and earlier in the episode, you mentioned being able to sit down and have a meal. There's often a lot of people who struggle with just sitting down without television, without their phone, without their computer, to just sit down and have and enjoy their sandwich. Do you know how savory that sandwich is? How is that texture of it feeling your mouth? How satisfying does it feel? How is it going down your body? And how is that affecting your digestive system, and how satisfying that was, right? And that also allows you to be present and sit with your thoughts. And when we're in this constant state of motion, we're not being mindful, and then people are now overeating or under eating, or now there's indigestion because you ate too fast, or you didn't pay attention to what you were eating. That was probably not great to begin with, but you just continue to eat it anyway, right? So there's this constant movement, and then it's impacting people's well-being And then their relationships, being present with other people, being there with their partners, with their families, with their children, being able there to show up, meeting certain commitments that really do mean something to them because they've chosen another commitment that they thought might have been more important because they can't say no, right? So there's a lot of impact of it in a lot of people's daily functioning. And then that affects their relationship, and then that starts affecting their sense of well-being, and they start questioning themselves, and this can lead to long-term effects, in serious situations like generalized anxiety disorder or major depressive disorder and things like that.
Yeah, and in addition to all that, in the immediate term, as far as people's quality of life and their quality of their work, I've been thinking a lot lately about, as well as a lot of people, thinking about things like AI, right, and automation. And there's, as we're now finishing up 2023 as we're sitting here recording this, the last year has been all about ChatGPT and how that's going to just uproot so many people's careers or type of work. So here we have this very, escalated or, faster movement toward automation in our day-to-day work for a lot of us. But at the same time, we're still training our brains to never really be able to do the deep work. And in my opinion, it's the deep work, and a lot of people's opinion, it's the deep work, it's the creativity, it's the problem solving, it's all those things that you can't do when you're constantly on email. Those are the things where 10 years from now or 2 years from now or even today are the things where we're able to really still bring the value, right? So it's this weird, not only, you said about people worrying about the future, it's like, if you're trying to keep up with tasks as your way of demonstrating value, we're never going to be able to outwork AI, right? We're never going to be able to outproduce bots. But yet, culturally in the workplace, we're not yet really kind of like overall realizing that. And you're not seeing a big movement toward, okay, everybody, let's take a pause. The automation is here. You're not going to be able to outwork it. Let's shift your focus so that you're doing the things that are actually going to contribute. And my worry is that, especially with younger people that are just, they're growing up just scrolling and they can't pay attention very long because they've never had to. It's kind of like we're going in very opposite directions than what we need to. So I think to your points, there's the immediate impact in people's psychological well-being and their lifestyle and their connection with their family and coworkers. But there's also a real impact in the future of just like, what are we going to be doing for a living where we're going to actually be able to produce things that do matter?
Well, we're struggling with the idea of boredom and allowing ourselves to just run with thoughts and have creativity, imagination, and just being able to have free structured play and time, right? If we're not really letting go this need for control of time and just allowing ourselves to be in the moment, to be mindful, to really just allow ourselves to have thoughts, we don't have to hold on to them, we don't have to become them. And that's a lot of the crux of what mindfulness and meditation is to observe your thoughts in a non-judgmental way and not hold on to them. And now you're you're going down the path and you're reliving, every experience from that particular thought. So this need of being able to finally do the deep work comes with us to finally slowing down and doing one thing at a time, right? I work with a lot of clients that, sometimes they've struggled with, just in the morning, doing one thing at a time, like focusing on just getting out of bed, going to the restroom, focusing on brushing their teeth, doing now the next thing that allows them to get themselves ready, but just doing it one at a time without checking their phone or being responsive to something else. There's like kind of like this fear of, if I do one thing at a time, I'm not working fast enough or not doing enough, right? And slowing down is going to impede me in some way. No, slowing down and really being discerning of what you're about to do gives you the leg up of how efficient you're going to be later on, and really thinking about how, what are you about to do? What are you about to embark on? Why are you about to embark in what you're going to do? How are you going to do that? Being thoughtful, being discerning as to the next task, instead of just going, okay, I'm going to do this, I'm going to do that. And you're not giving any thought to anything, right? So the more that we can begin to slow down, I think we'll start facilitating some of that deep work that you're talking about.
And this, ultimately it's like, well, what's preventing the people from doing that? One is the boredom, the inability or unwillingness, or let's just call it discomfort with boredom, right? Discomfort with space, with not constantly being engaged with something. Wherever that discomfort comes from, whether it's fear or guilt or any of that. And then the flip side of that is the notion that, if, to what you said earlier, if I'm doing a bunch of things at once, that means I'm being really productive. And I want to chat with you about that really quick, about, from your point of view, on a clinical level, and basically the science of what is multitasking, and is it possible. And I'll start out with what I understand of multitasking is that it is cognitively impossible for the human brain to manage more than one complex task at a time. Now, there are, I think it was 2% of the population that is what they call super task switchers, where they can switch tasks very easily, but they're still not multitasking. They're just switching from one thing to another, to another, to another very quickly. And it's not coming with a lot of cognitive exhaustion, right? But for the majority of people, task switching, which is essentially another way of saying multitasking, is extraordinarily energy depleting. It requires a tremendous amount of energy. And so people getting to the end of their day, or even 1 in the afternoon, and they're exhausted. They can't, that's where the whole decision fatigue comes in. So that's my sense of it, that people still feel, but wait, this is how you get stuff done. This is how you're productive. And I want to kind of address that for a minute with you, get your sense of it. And either, maybe it is possible, or if it's not, to really bust that myth and give people an understanding, like, listen, you think you're being productive, but what you're actually doing is harming your ability to do your work, so that at least they can consider that, right?
Often when people feel that they can multitask, is that whatever they're working on, there's something else that gives them the sense that they're not alone, or that they can focus on things in a way that is deep, when in fact not. Sometimes people will talk about, oh, well, I can do work and the TV is not. There is no humanly possible way that you can be doing something where you're focusing on something in front of you and you're listening to that particular episode, whether it's TV or a podcast or whatever it is, right? Your immediate attention is looking at one particular thing that you are required to cognitively process, and that is occupied in the moment with that thing. You can't add another process behind that and think that you're absorbing the information from that. It's just background noise. And sometimes that comes from this constant need of being overstimulated, hearing noises, hearing things in the background. Some people struggle with silence, right? Working in silence. Think about the last time you just worked in silence, right? Or even if you were in the kitchen and you were cooking food, when was the last time you cooked and didn't have the music on, or a podcast on, or something else that was constantly humming in the background that was reminding you that you're not alone? What silence does, it makes you have to be in the moment, and you're sitting with your feelings, and now you're feeling stuff and you're hearing things and you're being much more present than something else that was overtaking your senses and overstimulating your whole body. So this idea of multitasking, it's just impossible. And for folks who struggle with issues like attention deficit, often it's because they are able to absorb so much from their environment that feels like they're multitasking, but it's really about helping them discern what to pick and choose and what they're going to focus on, so that they're not allowing the environment to overwhelm them, right? So this idea of multitasking, it's impossible. It's truly impossible. And if anything, it's just a sign of something that you are trying to avoid or kind of fill the void in, because you're struggling with just focusing on one thing.
Yeah, and as a quick caveat, I do want to also admit that there are, situations where if we're doing something that is extremely built into our habits already, like for instance, driving is a great example, right? So if you're a brand new driver and it's taking all of your attention just to remember this is where the signal is and this is the brake and all like that. You shouldn't be messing with the radio. You shouldn't be messing with anything. You shouldn't even be talking to the person sitting next to you, right? At some point, when that starts to become muscle memory, no, you do not want to be texting or doing anything silly. But at that point, when it becomes much more muscle memory, we are able to, in a different way, we'll be able to have a conversation with the person sitting next to us, and it's not necessarily putting us in danger. Do not do this at home, right? That doesn't mean you can multitask while you're driving, but there are things that when we kind of hardwire into our habits and we have the muscle memory, whether that's literally muscles or just our own nervous system, where it's easier. But being on a Zoom call talking about something serious and emailing people back, those are not those things, right? Those are not those things. So let's for people like, oh, well, I multitask all the time. It's like, yeah, when you're walking and chewing gum, maybe, right? But not when you think you're writing a really good email while you think you're being really present on that meeting. You're not. You're not present on either of them. And we can all tell, by the way, right? We can all tell that you're not paying attention.
People don't realize, how what they're letting go of and the value of what they can really get out of that interaction if they just focus on just being in the moment. When I am working with clients, I'm in the moment with them. I don't have other things going on. I try to avoid a lot of distractions. I encourage people to also avoid some of that. And if I see that, I have to bring that up, because that starts becoming an impediment that affects the process, right? Because then you're fully not present into the interaction. And then what are you really walking away from if you were never really there to begin with? Right. And a meeting that, you're listening to people, but you're checking emails, you're missing very important parts. People see your eyes darting, to different sides of the screen. People feel that you're not engaged. It's a sign of disrespect. And that will then affect your relationships and how people view you, when it comes to being present. Right. So it's also, if they are immersed in a culture that supports that, it's harder for people to get out of that if other people also do that too. And now you're in a Zoom call with 4 other people who are doing the same thing. You feel like, okay, well, this is a culture. This is just what we do, right? But when you really kind of stop and you wonder, okay, what's going on here? There's 3 other people who are doing this, right? That really lets you know about the culture and the place that you are that's fostering some of these behaviors and makes it think it's okay.
Yeah, and it brings us now, last few minutes that we're chatting today about, like, what do you do about this, right? So let's say, all these points we made, they're landing, right? And somebody listening to this is saying, like, yeah, this all makes sense, and it's something I've been struggling with, and I'm feeling overwhelmed and burnt out, and I've heard of meditation, I've heard of all these things, right? But ultimately, what's the right starting point, right? How does somebody start to move in the right direction? Because it's not going to be an overnight fix. And to your point, about you're on a call with 3 people, right? You're in this culture where multitasking is just the norm. One way, just to start us off, of breaking that cycle is leading by example, right? Of being the person willing to be the person totally present. I do this all the time on my meetings. I do this all the time when I'm doing a podcast or anything. It's part of what I do as a professional. It's bringing that on a sales call, anything. It's bringing that full presence to the person or people that I'm engaged with. And a lot of times, it's not that they'll automatically reciprocate, but I have a sense that it actually does, through that mirroring, through that automatic way that we as human beings kind of mirror each other. I think it does influence how much more engaged somebody might be on the other side.
Mhm.
And it's almost like it's a superpower. When people talk about how do we influence others, how do we have an impact, just having the skill of being able to shut off your phone, turn off your Slack, pay attention and really listen to somebody, really listen to them. It's for me, I'm not exaggerating by saying it's been life changing. I'm a talker. I'm somebody who enjoys talking. Years ago, I didn't have good personal kind of self-discipline over that. And I think it was exhausting for people. And over the last few years that I've been learning and getting better, not perfect, but getting better at being able to be more present and to listen and to create space for people to express themselves. My connections with people, my relationships, the quality of my relationships, the quality of my career has gone up. It's just not even, it's not even like measurable. So that's my first thing to throw out there is like, well, where do you start? Start with just going like, even if you're immersed in this culture where everybody's just multitasking, if you take ownership and responsibility for your actions, start there. And you might be surprised at not only the impact it has on other people as their perception of you, because who pays attention to each other, right? It's like a lovely thing to have somebody pay full attention. So it's a positive thing that you're creating for other people, but you might be surprised that it actually might start shifting it a little bit, at least in that call.
Yeah, and what you've identified is having the self-awareness to now model the behavior, model those boundaries, model that the way that you're showing up. That's also you're letting people know this is how I want to show up, and this is how I would like you to show up as well, because I'm here present in this moment. And I'm giving you my undivided attention. I expect you to do the same. So modeling that behavior is very important in our relationships with others to really set the tone in how this is going to go about. But it definitely starts with creating the clarity and self-awareness of what beliefs do you hold around busyness? How do you view busyness? How has busyness been carrying your life up until this moment? Why do you feel like maybe it's time to change some of this, right? Because this is another thing when it comes to the stages of change, there's a pre-contemplation. You can be thinking about making change and you may recognize there might be a problem, but if you're not very clear in that and wanting to really make that change, you're not going to do it, right? So being very clear as to why is this a problem? Why does it need to change? What would it require you to have to start doing in order to start changing your relationship with busyness, and also understanding this is a process. These are habits and things that we have built in within us for a while that require us to consistently, little by little, chip away at changing those behaviors. So being compassionate, being gentle with yourself, that you're recognizing that this is a habit that you're trying to change. It's going to take some time, but how can you do it in a way that gives you some small wins and gives you an opportunity to keep moving towards it? And if you slide back a couple of times, okay, so I'm back in this again. What happened here that I'm now reestablishing again this relationship with busyness that was harmful, that I'm trying to move away from? What happened here that I went back to it, right? And sometimes it's this constant need of adrenaline overstimulation that sometimes busyness gives you, that when things start slowing down, things are not as exciting and loud and boisterous and kind of overstimulating. There's a certain level of calmness, and that can be a big change in a lot of people's emotional stimulation.
Yeah, I love that. And I wanted to mention, as far as chipping away, and I love that you said that specifically, because I think that sets up a realistic and practical way for people to approach this. I'm thinking specifically about practices like meditation. So I've talked to a lot of people over the years when, you talk to them about meditation, and if they're not currently doing it, they have certain perceptions about what that means. One is, oh, I couldn't do that because I can't stop my thoughts, or I couldn't sit there for 20 minutes or an hour, whatever it is they picture in their minds, right? So I just want to kind of reframe that for a second as an option of a way to start chipping away, right? So you think about, to your point, you're not going to go from where you are now to perfect, and you don't need to. But you can look at it and saying something, whether it's a formal meditation practice, or even if it's just sitting quietly in a room, just for starting with a minute, 2 minutes. Like, it's not about, I have to go from this constantly distracted state of impulse, lack of impulse control, or whatever it is we want to define it as, to suddenly I'm meditating 3 times a day and I'm like levitating above my meditation cushion and all this, it's like, start small. Start with, while I'm on the line at the grocery store, I'm not going to check my phone. I'm going to be bored for a minute. I'm going to listen. I'm going to watch people just for that 3 minutes, Start with, in the morning, before I get out of bed, before I check my phone or do anything, I'm going to sit there for a minute and just breathe. Like, whatever works for you. Because what I found is, when that starts to become easier and easier, and you go, maybe one day soon, you go, I'd like to be able to sit for 10 minutes in the morning and meditate, or whatever that looks like. The beauty of that practice is not that you're having some kind of enlightened experience. It's that it's almost like practicing 3-pointers as a basketball player. If you can practice in a controlled environment with no distractions or few distractions, and you can get that into your muscle memory and into your habits, then when everything's going crazy around you, it's much easier to tap into that anchor. It's much easier to be able to draw that up. And it's surprising to me how I'm able to maintain a level of focus now that I was never able to do before. And I'm a very distractible person. Like, I need to have quiet in order to work. I'll put white noise on and earplugs and all that stuff. But I'm not looking for distractions, right? And so I just want to throw that out there and hear what your thoughts are. But as far as a starting point, you don't have to be perfect right off the bat.
But you mentioned something also with the idea of being okay with starting small. Often, and I see this, people who engage in a lot of self-improvement and high performance management and things like that, they set really big, lofty goals about how big they want to be able to show results, right? Meditating for 10, 20 minutes or things like that. It's small, but it's still significant if you're able for a couple of times a week to catch your breath for 2 minutes, when you never did that for maybe most of your life, right? And we have to be okay with small incremental steps that lead to big changes, and that it doesn't have to be this monumentous, huge challenge. And even when I hear things like meditation challenge, like, those are the 2 words I don't think you should ever pair together, is meditation and challenge.
You're not doing a mud run, right?
Yes. So we have to also be okay with the idea, this is not some big lofty corporate goal or, thing that needs to be huge in a way. This is going to look very small. This is going to look very slow. This is going to sometimes be inconsistent, and you may take 5 steps forward and 2 steps back. Right? So it's also being okay with how we're going to perform, and not setting these high expectations of what progress looks like. Because if anything, now we're replicating the same problem we're trying to get rid of. Right? We're doing it now when it comes to using in mindfulness, the sense of busyness and productivity and all that. So now you're going to treat mindfulness and meditation the same way. Right? So it's really kind of understanding that you have to approach this in a way so differently that you would normally do as something that you've been, working towards, especially if you're a high performer, right? Where you're constantly, you're setting high goals and high bar and things like that. When it comes to self-help and self-improvement, it's an opposite approach. It's much more compassion. It's much more consistency. It's much more understanding that you're human, right? And you're not a robot. So, if you're trying to get away from that, you cannot bring that into that space.
So to wrap us up, I'm going to throw this out there. This is my challenge to you, and I'm going to have to do the same thing. How can you wrap up your thoughts on this in 1 sentence?
It's okay to slow down.
I like that. Mine is, Don't forget to breathe.
Oh, a lot of people struggle with that.